Chapter 7. The Death of God, Its Implications. To all practical intent, as we have seen, Rushdoony announced, quote, the death of God, end quote. He did not formally do so, nor did Tillich, whose thinking he echoed. This remained for Altizer and others to do. The, quote, death of God, end quote, school of thought was long overdue. Max Stirner, Nietzsche, and others had long declared the death of God. Theologians were slower in doing so, not because their thinking was any more conservative, but because they had no desire to eliminate their jobs by eliminating God in the church. As a result, like Rushdoony, they spoke of, quote, the living God, end quote, who has neither life nor non-life, neither being nor non-being. We can be grateful to Altizer for trying to bring honesty to modern theology. The time requires, he holds, quote, a forthright confession of the death of the God of Christendom, end quote. The reason for the death of God and of the era of Christian civilization is epistemological, because, quote, all cognitive meaning and moral values that were once historically associated with the Christian God have collapsed, end quote. This collapse of meaning Altizer sees alternatively as a result and a cause of the death of God. At any rate, quote, we must recognize that the death of God is an historical event. God has died in our time, in our history, in our existence. Insofar as we live in our destiny, we can know neither a trace of God's presence nor an image of his reality. We must acknowledge, therefore, that if God has died in our history, then insofar as the Church has become Christendom, insofar as the Church has entered history, it has become a corpse. As Kierkegaard knew so deeply, and all traditional theological meaning, all our inherited religious meaning is in process, either of dissolution or of transformation. End quote. Altizer follows Mircea Eliade in defining modern man as the man who has negated the sacred in favour of the profane, and who regards himself as a purely historical being without any transcendental reference or meaning. Quote, now, by purely quote-unquote historical, being Eliade means a radically profane mode of existence, a mode of existence that has withdrawn itself from an awareness of the transcendent and immersed itself in the immediate temporal moment. This meaning of quote-unquote historical is intimately related to the modern idea of, quote, historicity, end quote, for in this perspective, quote-unquote historicity means a total immersion in historical time, an immersion that is totally isolated from any meaning or reality that might lie beyond it. So likewise, quote-unquote desacralized cosmos means profane world, and Eliade's meaning is that modern man wills to live in a profane world, wills to know the world is profane, end quote. God is dead because modern man wills it, and, quote, wills to live in a profane world, wills to know the world is profane, end quote. Modern man's word is the new creative word, a fiat word which kills and makes alive, ostensibly. As a part of his creative power, modern man abolished the transcendent and wills God to be dead. To cite Altizer again, quote, historical man, end quotes, is the man who is, insofar as he makes himself within history, is forced to identify himself with the historical moment, with quote-unquote historicity, and therein becomes bound to a destiny that he can only know as tragic, and an existence that he can only know as absurd. By choosing a profane mode of existence, that is, by willing to abolish the transcendent, modern man has made an existential choice. He has, quote-unquote, chosen a tragic mode of existence, for he has, quote-unquote, chosen an absolute autonomy which finally encloses him within the concrete moment itself. Therefore, modern man's choice can be realized only through the abolition of the sacred, end quote. Whether it is in the writers of the literary realm or in formal philosophy and theology, modern men make much of their, quote, tragic mode of existence, end quote. We should not take this too seriously. It is comparable to the plea of the man who, having murdered both his father and mother, asked for mercy on the ground that he was an orphan. Eliade himself, in discussing modern man and religion, states the case even more strongly. Quote, first of all, the non-religious man refuses transcendence, accepts the relativity of quote-unquote reality, and may even come to doubt the meaning of existence. The great cultures of the past, too, have not been entirely without non-religious men, and it is not impossible that such men existed, even on the archaic levels of culture, although as yet no testimony to their existence has come to light. But it is only in the modern societies of the West that non-religious man has developed fully. Modern non-religious man assumes a new existential situation. He regards himself solely as the subject and agent of history, and he refuses all appeal to transcendence. In other words, he accepts no model for humanity outside the human condition, as it can be seen in the various historical situations. Man makes himself, and he only makes himself completely in proportion as he desacralizes himself in the world. The sacred is the prime obstacle to his freedom. He will become himself only when he is totally demysticized. He will not be truly free until he has killed the last god. End quote. Man's condition is an act of choice. He, quote, refuses transcendence, end quote, because he is determined to know only, quote, the relativity of reality, end quote, and is prepared, quote, to doubt the meaning of existence, end quote, end quote. In other words, man is determined to have only the world of modern epistemology, a world without God and a world without essence or meaning. The world has no meaning because it has no eternal decree of God undergirding it. Thus, the outer world is denied meaning and is reduced to a position of relativity to man, as an aspect of man's experience. Man stands alone, having no essence, but only existence. But, if need be, quote, the meaning of existence, end quote, will also be doubted if existence should threaten to point beyond himself. The avant-garde dramatist Eugene Ionesco is thus very much a voice of the new theology and philosophy in demanding, on the one hand, an acceptance of man as such, and on the other, the freedom to be radically creative as though man were God and the sole arbiter of possibilities. Ionesco wants no saviour, quote, saviours hate humanity because they cannot accept it, end quote. Ionesco's dramas thus do not attempt to reform or save man. His purpose is unrestrained and unchanneled creativity. Quote, the free development of the powers of imagination must not be restricted. There must be no canalization, no directive, no preconceived ideas, no limits. I believe a genuine work of art is one in which the initial intentions of the artist have been surpassed, where the flood of imagination has swept through the barriers or out of the narrow channels in which he first tried to confine it, extending beyond messages, ideologies, and the desire to prove or to teach. This absolute freedom of the imagination is called escape or evasion by the gloomy critics of our time, whereas it is true creation. To make a new world is to satisfy the insistent demands of a mind that would be stifled if its needs were not fulfilled. End quote. Creation is irrational and emotional for Ionesco. Quote, creation implies total liberty. It is an entirely different procedure from that involved in conceptual thought. When I write a play, I have no idea what it is going to be like. I have my ideas afterward. At the start, there is nothing but an emotional state, end quote. Ionesco should be happy as a new god, but he is in fact miserable. Quote, I am dying myself, and nothing remains of nothing, end quote. He is, quote, aware of the impossibility of communication, end quote, and feels alone. The freedom of man from God becomes man's new slavery. The goal of modern man is freedom from God, the goal set before him by the tempter in the beginning, Genesis 3, 1-5. For the existentialist, man makes himself. Man has no essence, no pre-established nature, only being, until he, by his own choice, defines himself. Until man makes himself, he is, quote, indefinable, end quote, because he is as yet, quote-unquote, nothing. Quote, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself, end quote. This freedom and power have serious consequences. Sartre says, quote, Dostoevsky said, quote, if God didn't exist, everything would be possible, end quote. That is the very starting point of existentialism. Indeed, everything is permissible if God does not exist, and as a result, man is forlorn, because neither within him nor without does he find anything to cling to. He can't start making excuses for himself. If existence really does precede essence, there is no explaining things away by reference to a fixed and given human nature. In other words, there is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. On the other hand, if God does not exist, we find no values or commands to turn to which legitimize our conduct. So, in the bright realm of values, we have no excuses behind us, nor justification before us. We are alone, without excuses. That is the idea I shall try to convey when I say that man is condemned to be free. Condemned because he did not create himself, yet in other respects is free. Because, once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. End quote. Here again, a murderous orphan tugs at our heartstrings. Freedom, however, has a severe limitation. It is, in fact, negated by the certainty of death. Death is not man's choice, Sartre recognizes. For the Christian, it comes at God's appointed hour and as an aspect of God's determined purpose. But for the existentialist, quote, if death is not the free determination of our being, it cannot complete our life, end quote. For the existentialist, it is, quote, the sequences of the universe, end quote, which determine death, quote. If this is the case, we can no longer even say that death confers a meaning on life from the outside. A meaning can only come from subjectivity. Since death does not appear on the foundation of our freedom, it can only remove all meaning from life, end quote. We can understand now why Alfred Jarry, to assert his freedom, willed his death while still a young man. It was an attempt to assert a godlike determination over his own being. As Sartre recognized, quote, the very existence of death alienates us wholly in our own life to the advantage of the other, end quote. We can understand also why modern science is so determined to conquer death and to make man his own god. However, Sartre holds, by recognizing death for what it is, we can be freed from, quote, its so-called constraint, end quote. By accepting freedom, we accept finitude, quote. The very act of freedom is, therefore, the assumption and creation of finitude. If I make myself finite, and hence my life is unique, end quote. For all his existentialism at this point, Sartre joined Margaret Fuller, 1810 to 1850, in accepting the universe. For Sartre, quote, man is the being whose project is to be God, end quote. Quote, to be man means to reach toward being God. Or if you prefer, man fundamentally is the desire to be God, end quote. This presents a contradiction. Sartre had said that man has no essence, no predetermined nature, but now he defines man's nature as the desire to be God. Quote, man is the being whose project is to be God, end quote. Sartre is aware of this problem. Quote, it may be asked if man on coming into the world is born toward God as toward his limit. If he can choose only to be God, what becomes of freedom? For freedom is nothing other than a choice which creates for itself its own possibilities. But it appears here that the initial project of being God, which quote-unquote defines man, comes close to being the same as a human quote-unquote nature, or a quote-unquote essence, end quote. End quote. Sartre's attempts to escape this dilemma are not our present concern. We must note in passing that Sartre sees man's attempt to become God a futile one. Quote, for man loses himself as man in order that God may be born. But the idea of God is contradictory, and we lose ourselves in vain. Man is a useless passion, end quote. Previously, Sartre had identified freedom with nihilation. He declared this to be a strict identification. Quote, the only being which can be called free is the being which annihilates its being. Moreover, we know that annihilation is lack of being and cannot be otherwise. Freedom is precisely the being which makes itself a lack of being." End quote. If this seems to resemble the world of Alfred Jarry and Dostoevsky's Kirillov, it is because it does. What concerns us in all this is that the death of God means also the death of man. Some existentialists have seen this. Malraux wrote, quote, "For you absolute reality has been God, then man, but man is dead after God." End quote. According to Knight, quote, Malraux was one of the first to see that, quote, "the death of God," end quote, involves that of man. God understood not only as deity, but as any principle purporting to render the universe intelligible, quote, "Europe is dominated by the idea, more or less clearly defined, of the impossibility of grasping any reality whatever," end quote. Despite the loss of all the, quote, "coherent myths," end quote, with which Europe has attempted to domesticate that universe, she clings desperately to a conception which is nonsense without them, that of the, quote, "inner world," end quote, of the individual per se, end quote. Michel Foucault has gone further. He has proclaimed the death of man. In speaking of the coming death of man, quote, "Naturally, he does not mean that real people may soon be wiped out. His reference is to the liberal humanists' conception of man regarded as the uniquely proper centre for the organisation of knowledge and as a coherent, free, active essence in the universe." Foucault maintains that, quote-unquote, "man in this philosophical sense is, quote, a sort of image correlative with God," end quote, and, quote, "an invention," end quote, "of a surprisingly recent date, rendered possible by the cultural pattern that emerged in Europe around the beginning of the 19th century," end quote. Gunther Stent believes that the actual disappearance of civilization as we know it is a great possibility, but Foucault sees the death of man in another sense. It is the godlike man of humanism who is dying. Quote, "Each distinct cultural period," Foucault says, "conceals beneath its surface a characteristic quote-unquote system or quote-unquote structure, which he chooses to designate by the Greek term for knowledge, episteme. Episteme appears to have such a subtle mode of existence that it cannot be defined directly. Like poetry, it has to be sniffed out by examples and trapped by obliqueness." Foucault refers to it several times as merely a tendency towards certain ways of knowing, quote, "an archaeological network," end quote, as the space in which knowledge occurs, as a, quote, "historical a priori," end quote, and as whatever it is that, quote, "defines the conditions for the possibility of all knowledge," end quote, end quote. We are now at the end of an epistemological tradition, and the man created by humanistic epistemology is now dying. We are now in the process of finding a new and non-humanistic epistemology, Foucault believes. There is no evidence that what Foucault wants is a Christian epistemology. In any case, we have seen that the epistemology of modern man has had devastating effects on philosophy, religion, culture, and society. The everyday life of man has been altered and warped. In the modern worldview, quote, "we are given a religion of killing in place of a religion of a rising from the dead," end quote. By abolishing God from his philosophy, man dreamed that he was freeing himself for a glorious golden age in which man would be free to re-enter paradise on his own terms. Instead of gaining paradise, man has turned the earth into hell and seeks an escape into the realm of hallucinatory drugs. By means of his philosophy as well as by his drugs, Stent points out, quote, "the boundary between the real and the imagined has been dissolved. For the hippies, the reality principle is all but dead." This overt erosion of the reality principle embodied in the hippies was not, of course, invented in the Haight-Ashbury district. On the contrary, the philosophical basis of reality has been the subject of critical discussions for some 200 years, ever since Immanuel Kant claimed that, in the last analysis, the real world is a subjective concept rather than an objective fact. The transcendentalist world picture of the present avant-garde artists mentioned in the preceding chapter is evidently another latter-day reflection of this trend to lessen the importance of distinguishing between the real and the imagined. The lessening of this distinction appears also to be the theme of such latter-day films as Resnays' Last Year at Marienbad and Antonioni's Blow Up. But the novelty of the hippies consists in there being the first large-scale community in the West which actually acts according to these ideas. End quote. The result will be, according to Stent, a gradual decay of civilization to the point that we will recreate Polynesia on a global scale, man living in terms of pleasure rather than reality. The novelist Brock, in his trilogy, The Sleepwalkers, portrayed the disintegration of modern man and his culture as a product of epistemology. In an, quote, epistemological excursus, end quote, it is apparent why Brock called his work, quote, a philosophical essay, end quote. Brock was intensely aware of the disintegration of values, quote, can this age be said to have reality? Does it possess any real value in which the meaning of its existence is preserved? Is there a reality for the non-meaning of a non-existence? In what haven has reality found its refuge? In science? In law? In duty? Or in the uncertainty of an ever-questioning logic whose point of plausibility has vanished into the infinite? Hegel called history, quote, the path to the liberation of spiritual substance, end quote, the path leading to the self-liberation of the spirit, and it has become the path leading to the self-destruction of all values, end quote. There is now, Brock said, quote, a contempt for all philosophy, a weariness of words, end quote, as men despair of any answer. Man faces very urgent questions such as, quote, what is an historical event? What is historical unity? Or, to go still further, what is an event at all? What principle of selection must be followed to weld single occurrences into the unity of an event? End quote. Man has trouble phrasing his questions because of his, quote, complete mistrust, end quote, even of words. The world of philosophy and of modern man has been divided into a world of nature, unaffected by values, and a philosophy of spirit, conditioned by values. Quote, the first declared bankruptcy of philosophy, end quote, was to confine, quote, the identity of thought and being to the realm of logic and mathematics, end quote. In other words, the world of brute factuality was separated from reason or thought. Brock's solution was to return to an earlier form of the dialectic and to hold that, quote, the world is a product of the intelligible self, for the Platonic idea has never been abandoned, nor can it ever be, end quote. He did call for a systematic philosophy and religion, declaring that, quote, the total system of a religion makes the world that it dominates a rational world, end quote. But he still held to, quote, the independent sovereignty of reason, end quote. He recognized, quote, the disintegration of values, end quote, when man is left to his own, quote, empiric autonomy, end quote. But he sought to link autonomy to Platonic ideas and regain a unity of meaning. There has thus been no lack of awareness on the part of modern man as to the consequences of his epistemology. They terrify and disintegrate his being. Modern man has given us a more vivid picture of his own despair than we can ever rival. Terrifying as the nightmare of his existence is, it is the world of his own choosing. He prefers it to life under God. He is still like the murderer who, having killed father and mother, weeps in self-pity because he is an orphan. He knows what he is doing and why he is doing it. Man, the sinner, would rather blind himself than, seeing, to see God.